The premise of Ponti by Sharlene Teo, as I understood it when going into the book, is that there is a teenager growing up in Singapore who's sort of living in the shadow of her mother, who is ex actress from a film franchise about called Ponti, about the Pontianak, which is a sort of folkloric ghost, vampirish, undead thing from Indonesia, Singapore, and Malaysian culture. And yeah, so the this girl's mother played the titular monster, and so like that kind of has influenced or is sort of hanging over her life or something like that. That's all I knew about it when I was in terms of the story when I was going into the book. After the first 12 pages, I decided to just stop for a moment and think, why am I enjoying this so much? Because it was really good after the first 12 pages, and one reason was I started on audiobook, and the audiobook narrator was fantastic in her performance of Sue, the main character, and who is this disaffected outsider, self-pitying teen, which is like a really fun voice to read, I think, and very very convincing. Also, there's the setting of school in Singapore, and like the sort of oppressive East Asian heat and humidity, like the fan going around slowly in the classroom. It's like all these little details really kind of created a great sense of place as well. It was funny. I laughed out loud twice during those first 12 pages. Firstly, at the line, even the mosquito can't be bothered with me, which is, connecting both the sort of the self-pitying teen thing and the atmosphere, and also at a reference to Sadako. Like, I think some of the other schoolgirls call her Sue Sadako because she looks like the girl from The Ring. Um, and that brings me to like another thing that I really liked in the 12 pages, which was we get already this sense of strong affection that Sue has for her mother, but not her mother, but the mother that she knows from watching these old movies, which is this grainy 1970s horror film monster version of her mother. And it's that monster that she seems to have affection for rather than the actual person living at home. So that's kind of like aesthetically pleasing if you like those kind of movies, like which I do, to hear that described. And also like emotionally kind of complex, because it makes us wonder about what exactly is the nature of the relationship between the mother and daughter, and that ends up being a huge part of this book. So at this point I'm reading it physically and listening to it with the audiobook, because I kind of decided I just want to have a very decadent reading experience with this book. I basically devoted a whole month to it, of just like kind of reading a bit, listening to a bit. There's a bit I liked on the reading, the listening part, then I'd go back to the reading it, and you know what I mean, sort of like switching back and forth and just really taking my time with it, because it's been a while since I did that with a book, just like took a luxuriously long amount of time to read, and this felt like a book that I would like to do that with. So then we get to chapter 5, and I'm shocked because, oh, we're in a new perspective. This is a character called Circe, and if you follow my channel, you'll know I'm a sucker for a Greek mythology reference. But that's not the only thing that I liked about Circe. Circe is the classmate of Sue, but now we're in the year 2020. So Circe is 32 years old. Circe's main thing is basically that she has a tapeworm in her stomach, and like the kind of thoughts that she goes through, like while she's bored at work, thinking about this tapeworm, that how it got there, about what it's like having a parasitic creature living inside your bowels, like in the 21st century. And it's like, I don't know, it's again like the sense of place is very strong, but the main thing is this sort of comedy duo between Circe and her tapeworm, because sometimes she kind of gives it a bit of like personality, a bit of voice, a bit of thoughts, and just to like kind of pass the time. And through her imaginary relationship with the tapeworm, we get an insight into who she is as a character. By itself, I would read the Circe story, like if it was just a novella about a woman and her tapeworm chatting together and like whatever. It was really good. But I think, what as well as just being like kind of fun and refreshing in and of itself, it was especially refreshing where it was placed as the 5th chapter in this. And that brings me to another thing, like the structure of this book. So it turns out eventually that we've got 3 main characters, Sue, Circe, and Amisa. And Amisa is the mother of Sue, who is Ponti basically, and she we see time differently for her. Time passes, like we see her growing up slowly. So like we see how she moves from Malaysia to Singapore, and how Singapore develops, and her whole life kind of like flashes before our eyes. Whereas with Sue, we're in the early 2000s, in the teenager, I think, like just a few days basically. And with Circe, we're in 2020. and time is passing a little bit more quickly. So it's normal, I think, in novels to have different chapters, have different viewpoints, right, of different characters, and this is that. But the intentionality of the POV shifts between Cersei and Amisa and Sue felt so like well thought out, even though it's a very like done technique, right? Having these chapters from different viewpoints, it felt like new to me because I thought it was done like so well, and that's something that I think is a real strength of this book, the sort of overall structuring of it. Like, I think a lot of thought has gone into which chapter goes where and how time works, whether we're going to be in the slow, painful teenage timeline of Sue, or the kind of snappier but also like depressing timeline of Cersei because she's older and time is moving faster for her, or if we're going to be seeing this sort of like more like historical epic version of Amisa's life, who is a movie star obviously, and also through her we see kind of the development of Singapore as a country, although we see that in the other ones as well, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Now, one of the reasons why this book was very kindly recommended to me by Freddie from The Sluggish Reader is the language, very colorful language, especially the similes in it. Now, I sometimes have a hard time with similes in reading, in books in general. I don't often get on with them, but there is a kind or a type that I do like, and I found that type plentiful here. And the reason that I like these ones were because they're kind of infused with the characters who are thinking them or saying them out loud. You get a real sense of atmosphere and place, like for example the sticky humidity of Singapore, as well as the sardonic, unhappy, very like kind of melodramatic teenagery thoughts of Sue, or later on Cersei. For example, Singapore is 1 degree north of the equator and feels like a bullseye where a sun is aiming a shot at the earth with the intention of killing it. I mean, like, he's just manifesting that like this totally sucks energy, right? And as well as giving you a sense of the heat of Singapore, which and like really giving you a sense of place, like putting it on the map for you even. We also have Sue describing the elite kind of like bitchy girls at her school, at her high school, as being as sweet and manufactured as Japanese candy, as well as idle and cunning as crocodiles. So like, yeah, all of these examples, as well as being like kind of like playful and fun, really give you a sense of setting and place and culture, and atmosphere, which is just very, I don't know, like it feels cohesive in the book. Around the same time as reading Ponti, I read Catch the Rabbit by Lana Bastasic, and I did not get on with the metaphors and similes, which are also like peppered throughout that book and a really integral part of the style of that book. And I didn't get on with them, and the reason is, I suppose, like, while I kind of admired them, you know, as pieces of writing, I thought they were good writing, but in Ponti, the metaphors and similes are not as sophisticated or complex as the ones in Catch the Rabbit, but they do way more like kind of tonal stuff and like atmospheric and character focused work in the book, and that was what made them, as well as being just really fun and like kind of playful and tongue-in-cheek, and that is what like kind of, I guess, the tone as well as what they did in terms of characterization and setting was what really made the metaphors and simile and all the kind of colorful language in this book quite successful for me. I want to give you another example. So I won't read the whole section out, but there's a kiss that happens at like a key point somewhere in the novel, and this kiss is described as taking place in an intimate panic because it's happening at like a kind of key plot development. And in the kiss, the man's tongue in the woman's mouth feels like, I quote, a fat tender worm stubbed to a stem. And this makes the main characters think of Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman with their close-lipped kisses, crisp, shifting profiles, the epic idea of romance. And then at that same moment, she thinks of her mother in the kitchen, wondering about what disrespectable deed her daughter was up to, if she even wondered at all. So this is all like in the space of 1 or 2 or 3 sentences. And those 3 images, right, like the gross worm and the Casablanca, the classic film, and what was the third one? And then thinking of her mother and wondering what her mother is thinking of her and if she's like would be ashamed of her, or if she even ever thinks about her at all. It gives us the morbid sensuality, family alienation, and impact of cinema on people's like subjective experience of day-to-day life. and just important life events. All those three things are there in that colorful language, and those are the key. Like for me, I think some of the key themes, if not the key themes, of this book. It's not only kind of interesting to read on the page, but it encapsulates so much about what this novel is actually doing and what it's about. Now, for me, out of all the themes in Ponti, easily the one which stood out the most and which I found the most unusual in the sense that I don't really read it in fiction very often is the theme of cinema and like films and movies and how they shape our lives. And that was just all the way through this with all three of the characters in different ways. Obviously, there's the central conceit of the mother being this monster from the films, and that these particular old films influence everyone's lives in different ways. The three women's lives get like shaped by Ponti, the film, in lots of different ways. But it's not just Ponti. It's like lots. It's just film in general. The concept of film. For example, at one point, something really terrible happens to Sue, and Cersei goes to comfort her, and she doesn't want to be comforted, so she kind of wards her off with this gesture. And this gesture she takes from the 1950 movie Rashomon by Akira Kurosawa. And she says in her narration, we hear that she had watched this with Cersei because they wanted kind of like art kid cred. They wanted to be kind of cool and watch like a classical 1950s old school Japanese samurai movie, and that they just fell asleep almost immediately. But before they fell asleep, they remembered seeing Toshiro Mifune as the samurai and this gesture that he'd done, this sort of strong samurai character, and she remembered that gesture. And so it's like that gesture from that old film is what Sue is using now, physically like embodying that to get through something incredibly difficult that's happening in her life now, even if she hasn't really properly watched the movie or understood it or anything. So it's that like kind of visual and physical thing that she got from the movie that she watched and then like uses it to cope in normal life, which is I think fascinating and really interesting, and something which is like absolutely infused throughout this book. And as a film lover myself, I was completely captivated by that. Now, not just films, I have to say, but the sort of the aesthetic of old grainy Asian horror films is something which personally gives me life. There's this sort of campiness and genuine scariness and creepiness and history and feminism, because like the ghosts or monsters in lots of Asian folklore are women who are like treated badly by men, and then they come back after they're dead to get revenge on those men. Another big theme which really hit the mark for me was adolescence. Not just in Sue's chapters, but in all the chapters, I think there's a sort of adolescent voice or a vibe, at least, of hearing characters express how they're, how things are unfair, how life is not good for them, how they're unhappy basically, and they do it in this over dramatic and narcissistic often way, which is nonetheless very relatable, I think, especially between Cersei and Sue. It's important that Cersei is 32. She begins the novel at 32. She ends it at 33. But she has the line, for example, "I'm so angry and alone I could kill someone," just like out of the blue there. And that feels like the kind of thing a teenager would be saying. And I feel like for some people that might actually not work in this novel, the way that Sue's voice and Cersei's voice are quite similar, in that they both have this very similar sardonic, morbid humor, and that they both have this, oh my god, everything totally sucks kind of energy about them, as well as being surrounded by 90s and 2000s memorabilia, which was also like really fun for me. And yeah, I'm 32, so like all the pop culture references were wonderful, but also this adolescent thing was very relatable. And I think for me, the reason that it really works that Cersei and Sue sound quite similar is because I could believe that the reason they became friends is because they had this shared sensibility, and that's just something that they grew up with and that they retained into adulthood, or at least Cersei did. But also I feel like Sharlene Teo really kind of like elevates adolescence as something which is not just something that happens like at a part of your life, but all those feelings, those teenage feelings, are actually really honest and legitimate responses to the world, which in many ways does really suck. And so like I did feel like this book, like I said, like elevated adolescence to something which is a universal human experience that persists throughout your life rather than just when you're a teenager. Because I think that people often tend to be a little bit dismissive of it and think like, oh, it's just a phase that you go through and then you get better and then you're happy. It's like obviously that's not true in many ways. So yeah, and unhappiness, yeah, not just adolescence but unhappiness, I think, is a huge theme and a thread that runs throughout this book, which is why I think it's so important that it, in many ways, it's so light and playful in the way that it's written, and that the language is so colorful and fun. Because yeah, it's about like misery and suffering, and it expresses this through like female relationships, like friendship with Cersei and Sue, or family with Emisa and Sue. But still, like essentially, it's, I think, kind of about this sense of being overwhelmed by the world, and you know, finding it lacking in many different ways. And then what do you do? Like, how do you deal with that? How do you go on living? And if you talk about stuff like that, you got to do it in a funny way, I think. Otherwise, it's just going to be a miserable reading experience. And this was anything but. My only niggle really is like the ending. I think it's a bit ambitious. I think what the path that Sharlene Teo goes down, and I'm not sure if she really pulled it off or not. Like, I'm really looking forward to rereading it now that I know kind of how it goes, to see. But like, yeah, when I read it the first time, I was like a little bit let down by the ending, but everything else was so good that it didn't really bother me that much, to be honest. I can see how some people might be put off by all the teenage kind of moaning and whinging, and also the language, which can be quite simple in a way. Like, it's strange that it manages to come across somehow as both quite casual and quite flowery in different ways. But like, for me, that's a strength, because like, while sounding very true and reflective of like young people, and like a teenager, for example, we also have these kind of great poetic ideas and reflections and complex things kind of smuggled in through like pretty language. It's got the feel of YA in some ways because of the teenage stuff, but also of like a literary fiction because of the literary stuff, if you like. And for me, it's really one of those best of both worlds situations where I wouldn't categorize it as necessarily one or the other, but like maybe taking the best of both and being just fantastic for that. So I am, yes, quite glad that I spent like basically a month reading this and like listening to it and going through pages, rereading bits that I liked, and just like kind of spending loads of time on it, because it turned out to be like one of my favorite books that I've read in recent years. And I'm really excited to see whatever Sharlene Teo comes up with next. This is her debut novel, I should have mentioned. Let me know below if you've read Ponti, if you got on with it, if you didn't. I haven't read like any of the reviews around this yet, but I do know that it was a bit controversial. Oh yeah, no, that's not true. I did read one review, because I know there was like one review in The Guardian which was like apparently like really dismissive of the writing style, and then that made a lot of other like reviewers kind of like fight back, and so there was a kind of like Twitter war or whatever about like Ponti. And so I read the original like offending article before I read this, but apart from that review, I haven't read any of the other ones. So I'm quite excited to see actually what other people made of this book, and if it really is all that divisive or not. But I at least absolutely loved it, and I hope you do too. But yeah, chat down in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.